because at that time, I couldn't just wheel him into the emergency room like you would any other time. The emergency room had been blocked off, and what they instructed me to do, because nobody wanted to really touch him at the moment, because I told them right away that he was COVID positive, is I had to go park and get a wheelchair myself and go back to the car and get him. And then I could only go so far, and then the medical staff took him back.
There was the last normal day, the last day that things were the way they were before they weren't anymore.
We kind of all rushed out of the house and said a quick goodbye. And, little did I know that would be the last time I hugged my mom.
He yells and tells me he's getting ready to go. He said, "I'm okay. Just stay here. I'll be home in a few hours." We tell him bye and he leaves. That was the last time we ever saw him.
It's like the minute that helicopter hit the air, it just hit me what I was watching, because I knew he wasn't coming home, and he knew he wasn't coming home.
For me, I took it more personally because I'm a nurse practitioner, and why can't I save him? I can help all these other people, and why can't I save him?
Telling us that it was time, we needed to make a decision, we need to go ahead and just take him off the ventilator. And I was like, how do we know?
One thing I like to tell people is that if you lose somebody to COVID, your need to talk about the person you lost will outlast other people's desire to hear about it.
We make sure that our family members and loved ones' memories lived on. That's really important to me, is that people don't forget. I don't want to forget any of it.
So talk about them. Talk about them till people are sick of hearing about them, because as long as you're still talking about them, they're never far away.
And the last thing that my mom said is, she said, when you get to heaven, we will look for each other.
Hello everyone, you're listening to For Those We Lost. I'm your host, Jennifer Sullivan. Thank you for being here. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com, or go to the website forthosewelostpodcast.com and click on the contact button, and you can reach me that way as well. Also, if you'd like to help support the show, you can do that at buymeacoffee.com/forthosewelost. The link is also in the show notes. All right, let's get started with this episode. Today I'll be talking to Shelly in California. Shelly lost her husband, Ronnie, to COVID on July 3rd, 2020. Shelly shares so much in this show about how she and Ronnie met and the life they were building together. For context, we recorded this episode on September 26th, 2022. Shelly and Ronnie had 2 dogs that were especially important to them, and in this episode, if you listen, you can hear one of them snoring in the background for part of the show. If you have headphones on, you'll probably hear it even more. I didn't even try to edit it out because Shelly talks about the dogs and how important they were to her now that Ronnie is gone. We mentioned the Yellow Heart Memorial, the Rose River Memorial, and the Pacific Marine Animal Rescue in this episode. All those links are in the show notes. And with that, I'd like to welcome Shelly to the show. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. And you live down in California.
Yes.
I say down because you're down for me. I'm in Oregon. And today we're talking about your husband, Ronnie.
Yes.
And he passed away on July 3rd, 2020.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So where I like to start, and I think it's a good place to start for this story since it was 2020, is for you to just go back to March and talk about what happened, how you heard about COVID, what happened with your husband's job, your job, and how your life changed.
Okay. So back in March, of course, like everyone else, we started hearing about COVID on the news, not thinking that it was ever going to turn into the magnitude that it did, a full-fledged pandemic. We never expected it to get to us in California, maybe naively. And of course, never thought that it was going to affect us like it did. And as the numbers grew and grew, and we started to see COVID spread, come March, everything shut down. So we were both home together, which now looking back at it, I'm glad we had that time together. With our schedules, it was very rare that we would have a lot of time off together. He would work weekends, I would have weekends off. And just like many people during that time, we were catching up on TV shows, having food delivered, doing all the little trends, making, bread from scratch and just trying to get through it. And we were very careful not to expose ourselves to COVID. And then when, they started to open up slowly, some businesses. And since my husband was in the retail industry and he was the general manager of his store, he was required to go in. It was a skeleton crew, but he still needed to be there. And, it's very hard to pinpoint where he got exposed to COVID. It's almost impossible. I believe he was exposed at work. But, with it being highly contagious at that time, it's really hard to know for a fact. And he started having some slight symptoms, but we both have allergies and stuff like that. So that's what it kind of came off as at first. And he had called his doctor, and even his doctor says, "Oh, I don't suspect it's COVID, but we'll test you just to be safe." And I'll never forget, it was a Wednesday, and I had just come out of the shower, and I heard him on the phone with his doctor, and they told him that he had tested positive for COVID. And I remember it felt like my heart had stopped for a few seconds, because we saw what was going on at the news and the number of people that we were losing to COVID on a daily basis. And I really started to get nervous. So we kept track of his temperature. I have a pulse ox machine. We kept track of his pulse and his oxygen level. And I remember he was like, I'm good, babe. I got this. I got this. And he seemed like he was okay. So he had the positive test on Wednesday. We went to bed normal Friday night, and Saturday morning I woke up and I found him in the living room on the sofa, and he was sitting up, and he told me that he was having a hard time breathing and that he felt like he needed to go to the hospital. So I drove him to the hospital. The hospital was less than 10 minutes away, and it was interesting because at that time I couldn't just wheel him into the emergency room like you would any other time. The emergency room had been blocked off, and what they instructed me to do, because nobody wanted to really touch him at the moment, because I told them right away that he was COVID positive, is I had to go park and get a wheelchair myself and go back to the car and get him. And then I could only go so far, and then the medical staff took him back. And, I remember just telling them, because we had our masks on and everything. So I just kind of, as they wheeled him off, I said, okay, babe, well, call me. I'll come pick you up later. And I just kind of brushed his arm and I said, okay, I love you. I'll see you soon. And he was like, okay. And I later found out that by the time the nurse had taken him back and triaged him, his oxygen, I think, was at like 40%.
Wow. That's so low. That's amazing.
Extremely low.
Yeah.
And I did talk to him. He had his cell phone with him, and we were texting back and forth, and they said that they got him on oxygen and they had him on an IV, and his oxygen was coming up. So he said, I'll probably be here for a couple of hours. And I said, okay, I'll be ready to get you when it's time. And then later on in the day, he called and said, well, they're going to keep me overnight. And I said, babe, do what you got to do. That's fine. I'll be here. And then it turned into, well, they're going to keep me a couple of days. And I said, that okay, whatever you got to do. And then it turned into, the doctor doesn't want me really being on my phone. He really wants me to focus on, resting and getting better. And I said, okay. And, he progressively got worse, which nobody really expected. When I would get updates with the medical staff, between myself and my mother-in-law, we were taking shifts, constantly calling the hospital and speaking to the nurse and getting updates. He started to get worse, but they said, he's young, he's in good shape. We see this a lot. We see, one step forward, two steps back. This is pretty standard for what we're seeing with COVID patients. And I said, okay. So they said, he might be here for a while. I said, that's okay, and I was really trying to stay in a good headspace and think positively. But he did end up getting COVID pneumonia in both of his lungs, and he just he was not getting better, and we were really trying to keep him from being placed on the ventilator, because what you were seeing in the news, it was a very scary time, and they were doing everything. I mean, the staff was amazing, um, and he was getting tired. He was getting really tired, and they actually, uh, what the way they put it is there was a medication that they would administer through the ventilator, and they were going to try to find a way to get that medicine to him without placing him on a ventilator. So they said, we've never done this before, but it's worth a shot. So they called it, they MacGyvered some tubing and stuff to try to get this medicine to him. And they did attempt it, but it wasn't working. So they contacted me again and said, I think we're getting to the stage where we need to consider placing him on the ventilator. And he was still able to, communicate at that time. And he also agreed that would be the next step. So, I was able to FaceTime him before he was placed on the ventilator. And he was successfully placed on the ventilator, but when he was coming out of anesthesia, he was fighting it. And every time he would fight the ventilator, his oxygen saturation would go down. So they decided to place him in, I don't want to say a medically induced coma, but basically paralyzing him so that he wouldn't fight the machine.
Yeah.
So that he went in on a Wednesday, and he lasted in the hospital about 10 days. He went in June 20th, and he ended up passing the morning of July 3rd. And they had called me that morning. I didn't sleep the whole time he was in the hospital. I just, my mind wouldn't turn off. I, at the same time, was dealing with COVID.
So you got COVID as well.
Yeah, I had COVID as well. And I figured I would because, we were together. And he kept asking in the hospital, babe, are you positive? Babe, are you positive? And I lied to him, and I told him, no, I'm fine. And I also told the staff, I am positive with COVID, but don't tell him. I don't want him to worry about me, because he kept, are you okay? Are you okay? I said, yeah, babe, I'm fine. I wanted him to just focus on himself. But I got really sick. And I wouldn't tell anybody the severity of how I was feeling, because we had Ronnie to worry about. We had bigger things on our plate. And I don't know if it was the stress that was added on top of COVID that made me really sick, but there was a night or two that I was really scared. I was really scared. And I knew if I told any of my family members, especially my parents, that they would come to our place, and I didn't want them to get exposed. So I, I try not to think about that time period a lot, but when I do, um, I'm really surprised how I got through it. Um, and having to be sick and also be in a good headspace to make the right medical decisions for my husband was extremely hard. Um, you know, you don't, being my age, you don't think that you're ever going to have to um, deal with situations like this, where I'm making the medical decisions for him and on his behalf, and how extremely difficult and emotionally and physically taxing that is on somebody. So when they called me that morning, um, they had, I remember the phone ringing, and I jumped out of bed, and they said, is this Michelle? I said, yes. And they said, um, we want to know if you can get over to the hospital. Uh, your husband had coded, and we were able to bring him back. Um, but if it happens again, and most likely it will, we don't think we're going to be able to revive him. So they had also called my in-laws. So my mother-in-law called me and said, we're on our way. We're going to come pick you up, and then we're going to drive to the hospital. And then the hospital called back and said I was the only one that could go because I had just had COVID. I had been cleared on Thursday, finally, because I had tested a few times, and I finally came back negative on Thursday, and he passed Saturday morning. And because I was the only one in my family that time that had just gotten through COVID, I was the only one allowed to go. They didn't want my other family members and his family members to be exposed in the hospital.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I drove myself to the hospital, and I don't even remember how I got there. I
Yeah.
don't. You just,
Yeah.
you go into that like fight or flight mode, I guess. Um, and I drove myself to the hospital, and I had to wait in the lobby until they were able to come get me. And I had to basically put on a hazmat suit, and they took all my belongings and whisked that away from me and put them in like a sealed bag. And they took me in the room, and I was not allowed to sit down or touch anything or touch him. And I remember there was one male nurse in the room with me because I wasn't allowed to be alone in the room with him. And I'm sure that the staff knew what was happening more than I could fathom. It still felt like this wasn't really happening. And he allowed me, and of course I had gloves and all, 2 or 3 masks and a face shield and everything on me. And he said, you know what, you can hold his hand, you can touch him. Um, and that's what I did. I think I felt like I was going to walk in and sorry, that I was going to walk in and our love was going to be strong enough to pull him out of this. But, uh, I couldn't even tell you how long I was in the room with him. Um, and some of the machines started going off. And I remember I'm like, what's happening? What's happening? And um, the nurse says, uh, basically we're losing him. And I remember walking out of the room, and his pulmonologist came up to me with tears in his eyes. And he said, Michelle, he waited for you. Um, and it was like an out of body experience. How quickly everything can change. And, the nurse whisked me into a room, an empty room, and, uh, was asking me a bunch of questions, and I couldn't process any kind of decision making at that time. And uh, I remember he stepped out for a little bit, and I had to call all our family members and our friends to let them know. And I remember some people were on the road because of the 4th of July weekend. And I just remember just their reactions and their screaming and their crying. Having to tell his mom that he didn't make it. And it's just I still don't believe it sometimes.
Yeah.
And my mom drove to the hospital, and my brother, who lived and worked in a whole nother county, drove to the hospital so that when I walked out, I wouldn't be alone. And it's just, it was such a weird experience leaving the hospital with just a bag of his belongings. And, there was nobody in the hospital. And, it was like a ghost town. It was so eerie.
Yeah.
And I couldn't make any decisions on what to do right away. And I know at that time the hospital was just concerned with, his body and what to do with his body, because they were extremely overwhelmed, and I couldn't make any of the decisions. I didn't know what the right thing to do was at that moment. And my head was spinning. So, luckily I have an amazing mother-in-law, and she says, I will start the arrangements, and I will call the hospital back because I understand it's really hard for you. And she really started taking care of the arrangements. So I was really lucky that I have both of our families. They've just been such an amazing support system. Um, and my, my whole life changed after that day.
Yeah, that's something like you have said, and I've heard from other people. And the part for me is, uh, I don't know if I'm gonna say this properly, but I can't imagine. Like, when you say my whole life changed, in my mind, I can be like, "Yeah," but then there's so much more in that statement for you
Yeah.
than I can understand as someone who lost her mother, not her husband.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so I try to be mindful that that is such a deep statement that you just made, and it holds a lot. It holds a lot in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask you just a couple of questions,
Yeah, of
that I
course.
wrote? Okay. So so you talk to people from the hospital, you and your mother-in-law, every single day. Did you feel like you had to call a lot, or was there like a regularly set schedule and someone who reported to you that you felt like you had a lot of good support from?
There wasn't a scheduled time. Um, we did start to get familiar with the staff. There was a few constants, uh, constant staff members that we became familiar with. Um, what we would do is, because I wasn't sleeping, I was up all night off and on. My mother-in-law would do the morning calls, because she would say, you know what, you sleep in, you try to get some rest, I'll do the morning calls. And I would do the nighttime calls. And we would constantly be taking notes and talking over, what's going on with medical decisions, and what they were doing. Um, I felt a tremendous amount of support from the staff. They called me one day while he was in the hospital, and they wanted to know, what shows he liked to watch, what music he listened to, certain things about him, so that in the room they would have music playing, or they would have the TV shows on for him, which I thought was so, they had a lot on their plate. They really didn't have to take that extra step.
Yeah.
They told me that, he was really sweet, and he was always saying thank you, and thank you for taking care of me, and he was constantly talking about me and our doggies and our family. um so that was really nice that they shared that with me. And when I did come into the hospital that morning, um we had friends that had come by and dropped off, um, a painting. It was a painting of a butterfly that they put up in his room. And, uh, I had dropped off a rosary that was in his car, and they had that up in his room, and we had pictures, and they actually had the rosary laying on his chest when I walked in. So, they took those extra steps, for us. And I couldn't be more grateful that they tried to make a horrible experience a little less horrible. And I have not been back to the hospital. I have not reached out to any of the staff. It's extremely hard for me. Um, it's it's hard for me to go into that city where we lived, into those areas where, sorry, all our memories are. It's uh it's still extremely hard, but I've never stopped thinking about the staff and thinking about his specialists that tried so hard. I They tried to get him a lung transplant. They uh, presented him to different hospitals. His situation, they tried to put him on the iron lung um, because he was young and, you know, um, but he was just too sick.
Yeah. That kind of relates to the other question I wrote down, which is initially you were like, it's okay, babe, you're staying. You need to stay an extra day or two. When did you really start to worry and sort of feel that this wasn't gonna go well?
So, um, I don't even know what date in it was, but what they were doing is they were having him like lay on his stomach for so many hours of the day, and then they would turn him. So I think it started off like 8 hours on one side, 8 hours on another, and then it came to like 12 hours a day on his stomach and 12 hours on, flipped over. And it, the numbers started getting bigger. And I think I think that's when I started to worry. Um, because it was extremely taxing on him and his body. And when they started talking about being placed on the ventilator, that's that's when I really started to worry. Um, and and it may seem naive, but knowing, if you knew Ronnie and I's story, you would not think that this was going to happen. And knowing who he was, just such an amazing person, you're like, nope, this isn't how the story is going to end. He's too good of a person. I mean, not to say that that judges, you know, somebody's fate, but I'm just saying, for me in my head, I'm thinking this is not, I know this is not how it's going to end. This is not how our story is going to end. Um, I always envisioned like him being on the news, and they'd be wheeling him out of the hospital and people would be cheering. And, I had a social worker and we were planning on, um, what's going to happen when he gets out of the hospital and his recovery. And I knew it was going to be a journey. He was not going to come out like nothing had happened. I knew that it was bad enough that his recovery was going to be hard. His social worker had already ordered up oxygen. We knew he would be on an oxygen tank, and we were starting to make arrangements, you know, with his employer to be on a medical leave through the state and for me to be his caretaker. And his family had started getting a room ready for us because we were going to need help.
Yeah.
But that was the turning point, I think.
Yeah, because Those sound like hopeful things, like things where the hospital and social worker and people were like, he is going to get better and be able to be released from the hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, the social worker had called me while I was in the car driving home from the hospital, which is really, really weird too, because I drove home after this.
Oh,
And even though my mom and my brother said, no, no, Shelly, no, no. And I was like, no, it's okay. I got it. I got it. And I drove home. Um, and the social worker called and she was in shock. And she was like, no, this is not what happened. You know, she's like, I was just there. And she was really surprised by the outcome, as all of us were. Um, so, yeah, I don't know.
yeah. So, did you have a funeral or a memorial service for Ronnie?
Yes, we did. We actually went to Rose Hills a couple, I don't even know for sure, but a couple days later, um, my mom and I and his parents, and there's a beautiful big cemetery in Whittier called Rose Hills, and uh, we made arrangements. We had to wait about 3 weeks for an opening, and we did have a service for him. He had always wanted to be cremated, and I remember um, being worried about telling his parents what his wishes were because him and I had discussed it, but um, I don't think it was ever discussed with his family. And I remember being so nervous to tell them, but I wanted to make sure that Ronnie, that we followed his wishes. And his parents could not be any more understanding. Um, they knew, our relationship and our love, and they completely, just it accepted, what I said his wishes were. There were no issues as far as that goes. Um, so we did have a service for him. Of course, the amount of people was extremely limited, which was fine. I was just happy that I was able to even have something for him. Um, so I think he would be, pretty happy with how everything came out for him. I really, really tried to just keep thinking, what would he want? What would he want? What would he want? While all our emotions are all over the place.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh,
so
yeah, and it's not anything you think you're gonna be doing as
no,
yeah.
no, not at all. Um, I met Ronnie in high school. He was the band leader, and I was on the drill team, and we had to interact with each other for competitions. And we actually, me and my friends, we used to pick on him, we used to tease him. And
Oh,
after high school, because our parents lived on the same block, he would ride his bike down, and we actually became best of friends. Um, and he would go camping with us and vacation with my family, and then we started developing feelings for each other, but no, it was that kind of weird, awkward, step. And yeah, I've known him for more than half my life. Um, and very interesting similarities. Uh, like his mom and my dad were born a couple days apart, and my mom and his dad are a couple days apart. And I remember the first time I took him to Rose Hills, it's a huge facility. I went to visit my grandmother's grave, and he said, "Wait, my grandpa is buried in here." So my grandma and his grandpa were buried not too far from each other.
Wow.
So, we had a really strong bond and love. So, and it had always been, Ronnie and Shelly, Ronnie and Shelly. And it's really hard to kind of find out who I am now without him. Um, I'm still trying to really find my way. And I I think I can relate with other people that have lost loved ones to COVID, that they're not just a number. And it's really hard because there's so much controversy with COVID, and people have such strong feelings. And even within my family, there was a lot of discord over COVID and what we should and shouldn't be doing. And after we lost Ronnie, it really did open up a lot of people's eyes to, yes, this is a very real thing and should be taken seriously.
Yeah. I feel like in 2020, before, December and January and the next year into 2021 with vaccines and a lot of other things, I think a lot of people thought early on that it would not happen to them or around them, that
Right.
it was just going to be somebody else's family, and you might hear about a friend of a friend or something, but it wasn't going to hit that close. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah, I can relate to that too. I had a lot of family that were like, "Oh, ho hum COVID," and then, my mom got COVID and died, and then they're like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, okay." Yeah, I want to ask you about that first year, and also just going through the years, because you're on year 3,
Mm-hmm.
which it's crazy to me to think that
It
that much
is.
time has passed. But you also have I guess, I don't know if it's a complication, but it's right at July 4th, which is like this national holiday and this happy time and celebration and all this other stuff. How did you cycle through that first year? Did you feel angry? Did you work through your anger or your grief? I mean, obviously not all of it, but how did you do that and then build up to that next year, where not only are you coming up on July 3rd, which is the anniversary of when he died, but
Mm-hmm.
the next day too?
Yeah, that was a really weird time because, yeah, everybody was in celebration mode and let's party. And um you know pictures from the previous 4th of July was popping up on my phone, and I'm just sitting there in disbelief, like, how did we get here? How did this happen? And it's it's interesting. I could look back at that first year now, of course, because I'm I'm through it. I feel that the first year, I was really focused on milestones, memories, making new memories, staying connected with family. Um, I had a lot of highs and lows that first year. I realize now that like every holiday and every birthday, um, I tried to make extra special. And at the same time, when I was actually, when that day would come, it was really hard for me because he wasn't there. So I would put in extra effort for families members' birthdays and holidays because I realized, okay, life is short. Um, you know, uh, we got to put in a little extra effort. But then that time would come and it would just emphasize that he's not here. So I would find myself in a really bad funk that day. And that went on for the first year, but I tried to keep busy, even though still we were in the thick of COVID and the world was kind of at a standstill. But, if I had to do extra decorations outside in the backyard, I would. And um, the second year, as time went on, it became actually harder for me. It's almost like it became more real. And it's like, well, we got through the first year. Now what? And time keeps going by and it's like, now what do I do? I feel for myself it's gotten harder. It's gotten a lot harder. I still haven't had a good night's sleep since he passed. That's something that I struggle with every night, is my sleep. I made a lot of hard decisions that I never had the guts to make before. Like I resigned from my job that I had for about 17 years, and decided to go back to school to become a respiratory therapist. And I'm in the thick of that now. And I picked that profession because of losing Ronnie to COVID. And I wanted to help people with respiratory issues and maybe going through some of the things that he experienced. And I want to be able to be kind and supportive to a patient like the staff was with him.
Yeah.
And I really want to make a difference. But it was also extremely hard to be in that classroom and learn about some of the things that, he went through. And my last class was actually all about the ventilator. And I had a really, really hard time with that class. And it was definitely, going to school for this profession was definitely a catch-22. And I didn't really share with the class my experience because I didn't want to be treated differently, or people to look at me with pity, or with or look at me differently. I already felt out of place because I am the oldest one, out of
Yeah.
out of all of my classmates. But I did let my professors know, because I wanted them to know that if there was ever a time that I needed to step out of the classroom or I needed to step away and gather myself, that this is why. Um, and everyone's been extremely supportive. And I did my first round of clinicals, and that was really hard too. We did have some patients that were in there recovering from COVID. Um, and that was hard, but I'm really determined. I'm really determined. And I I use him um, to keep me going, and to really get through these hard situations.
Yeah. Do you, so, I mean, I had pneumonia twice in the last 10 years, and just having that, and I had bronchitis issues. That that's like not being able to breathe is so
Mhm,
terrifying. And do you think, like, over time that you're gonna see long COVID patients,
mhm,
and probably as time goes on, a fair amount of them.
mhm,
And in a way, what happened with Ronnie, even though I know you'd rather have him here,
mhm.
is gonna allow you to be there for them in a way that maybe a lot of people in the medical field can't be, because they won't get it or understand. I mean,
Right.
long COVID's gonna be a long battle. That's gonna be a long process.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I I have a chronic cough. I also have asthma and allergies, and having COVID obviously did not help,
Help. Yeah.
my situation. Um, and I would always get embarrassed because I would tell my mom, "Mom, I can't be a respiratory therapist student and be coughing all the time." But it is a horrible experience, when I've had like an asthma attack, not being able to breathe. And I think going through my situation, and always having Ronnie on my mind, um, I do have that extra bit of compassion for the patients. Um, and I can say I'm pretty proud of myself, especially going through clinicals. That was a scary but brand new experience. Um, and I was able to hold it together, long enough. I would never want the patients to see me fall apart or break down. So I always had him on my mind constantly. I would literally tell myself in my head, you know, how would you treat them if it was Ronnie? How would you have wanted Ronnie to be treated? Uh, and I would just replay that in my head constantly, to just to to help me get through it.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mm. So I have a few questions. Um, as I get closer to the end, I have one question I ask everybody, but a
Mhm.
couple of other questions. I know, and if you don't want to talk about your dogs, that's okay. But
No, it's fine.
I know that you have this dog that you're holding on to because it's yours and Ronnie's. It's like your
Right.
child. And
Yes.
so how are the dogs? How is the dog doing?
So, um, so Bentley is doing okay.
Good.
We had two King Charles Cavaliers, two boys. Kingston was my older guy, and Bentley was my younger. I lost Kingston. It's going to be coming up on a year now. And Kingston was extremely attached to Ronnie, and Bentley has always been my little baby. And Kingston actually passed from an upper respiratory infection, of all things.
Oh.
And I did everything I could to get him better. I had him hospitalized, I had him in oxygen chambers, and he just wasn't getting better. And that was extremely hard for me. Kingston had just turned 13, and I actually, sorry, I'm gonna break down. I actually had the sweatshirt that Ronnie wore to the hospital. I actually took it to the vet and had Kingston wrapped in Ronnie's sweatshirt um, as he passed. And that was extremely hard. And then I have Bentley, who's 11 and a half, and he's going to be 12 in January. And he's starting to have issues and health issues, and people give me a lot of slack because of the way I treat him. I go above and beyond, and I take him to laser therapy every week, and he's on all these supplements and CBD. And I try to explain to people that that's my last living thing to my old life, our life together. And so, yeah, it may seem crazy to other people, but to me, I want to hold on to him as long as I can.
Yeah.
Ronnie and I never had children. It was something that we had been trying for a long time, and actually, that same hospital that he passed at was the hospital that we went for our family planning and started the process to have children. And he actually had said before he got sick, you know what, babe, with all this craziness that's going on, I don't want to wait any longer. Call your doctor and we'll get a referral back to the specialist. I said, okay. So I got the referral, or I got the approval for the referral for the specialist on, I don't know, like a Tuesday or something. And I called to make an appointment, and by that time, all the offices shut down for COVID.
Oh.
So I remember standing in our kitchen, just crying, and like, why can't we catch a break? What are the odds? And of course, we weren't able to start our family. So our dogs were extremely important to us. And Bentley's extremely important to me, and I'm just gonna hold on to him as long as I can.
Yeah.
As he's staring at me right now.
Oh. Oh. So what do you miss the most about Ronnie?
Oh, his smile and his laugh, and just his thoughtfulness. He was the most thoughtful person I have ever come across. He listened. He paid attention. I'll never forget. I used to sit on the floor in our bedroom and do my makeup. And, I just in my own little world, and I would talk out loud and be like, oh, geez, I'm running out of my eyebrow pencil. And he must have paid attention, just walking by, listening to me, because when he went to work, he went over to Sephora. He gave them my telephone or my email and asked the girls to look up what eyebrow pencil I buy. And he would come home and be like, babe, I brought you a little present.
Oh.
And I'm thinking, how did you know? And he's like, I pay attention. So he was extremely thoughtful. And even with he didn't call his employees at work employees. That those were his friends. That was his family. And he would say, babe, I'm with them more hours of the day than I am with you. And I said, I know. But he wanted to know, about their spouses or their significant others. He wants to know how the kids are doing. He knew everybody by name. Oh, how's so and so? He was just extremely thoughtful that way. And he had the most beautiful smile and the funniest laugh. And there's actually a plaque up in his store that the company put up for him in his honor. He was an extremely special guy. Extremely special. Yeah.
So the last question I ask everybody is, what do you say to people who tell you that COVID isn't real?
Well, I've been lucky enough for somebody to not be that blunt with me, but people that are kind of saying, that statement without really saying the statement is, I say, Ronnie was very real. Our love was very real. Our life was very real. And that's gone because of COVID. So COVID is very real. The numbers don't lie.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm part of a community that nobody really wants to be a part of. There's an instant connection with anybody that I come across that has lost someone to COVID, because unless you've gone through it, it's really hard to understand.
Yeah.
Not being in control, not being able to have a say with the situation, on pins and needles. COVID is very real. It took Ronnie from us.
Yeah. You live in a part of California too where there have been a lot of memorials that go up and then come down at coffee shops. And I mean, I don't know exactly what part of California you're in, but in Southern California, have you submitted his name to any Yellow Heart Memorial installations down there or anything?
Yes, I have. I have submitted his information to the Yellow Heart Memorial, and then I don't know if I'm going to remember the name correctly, but I think it was Rose River Memorial. We lived in Orange County, in the city of Costa Mesa, and they actually did an installation right. Oh gosh, I'm not going to remember the name of the building, but right by South Coast Plaza, which we lived right around the corner from. And you picked up a kit of red felt, and you made little red felt roses in somebody's honor. And I made a red felt rose for Ronnie. And my mom helped me. We actually stitched his initials into it. And he had a beautiful, huge, but beautiful octopus tattoo on one of his calves. We got married at the beach. We got married in Huntington Beach, and we had a beach wedding, and we loved the water and the ocean. We had saltwater aquariums in all of the places that we lived. And he just loved marine life. And he had this big octopus tattoo on his leg. And so I found a little octopus like charm, and I stitched that into his rose as well. And then they did an installation. I want to say it's at the Orange County Museum of Art. So once that was installed, we went and looked for his rose. Couldn't find it, but we were there. So yeah, I've tried to participate in a lot of those memorials. He also has a brick in the pathway of the Pacific Marine Rescue in Laguna Beach. There was a brick placed in his honor by his friends from work. So we have gone and visited the Marine Rescue, and myself and other family members have continuously made donations to the Pacific Marine Animal Rescue in his name. And it gives us a place to go where we feel connected to him. The beach has always been a special place for us. Our last trip together for my birthday in February, him and I went to Zion. We stayed in a tiny house, and it started to snow. It was such an amazing trip. So on the 1-year anniversary of his passing, both sides of our family stayed at that same resort in Zion. I stayed in the same tiny house. And we had planned on releasing his ashes, but when I woke up that morning, I couldn't do it. It didn't feel right. And everybody supported my decision. And then this year we took a trip to Monterey, which is one of our other favorite places. And we stayed right on the beach in Monterey. And we're going to continue every year to take trips as a big family together, in his honor, and try to make new memories.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like so many of us lost loved ones, and then they become just part of this number that is hard to wrap your head around, and personalizing every little thing that we can. Like, I have heard of the Rose River Memorial. I knew they did some down in California, so I think that's beautiful. Like, every time you can put their name on something, say their name out loud, and do that, it brings an awareness to they were people who were loved, they had a family, they were real.
Yeah. Very much so.
Well, thank you, Shelly, for talking to me today.
Thank you for letting me share my story and sharing a piece of who Ronnie was, and and how I got through it, and I'm still trying to get through it.
Yeah, that's all we can do. I have found the years that go by to be harder as well. The first year's the hardest, and time heals. I think that's all crap.
Exactly. Yes, it is. Yeah, I'm forever changed. I'm definitely not the same person. And that's okay. I feel like I will feel whatever I need to feel, because that's my love for him,
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate what you're doing, and giving us a voice for what we didn't choose to go through.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I appreciate you. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
And that's the show, everyone. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com. This show won't ever have a members area or episodes that you have to pay to listen to, but there are expenses to hosting a podcast, and if you'd like to help, you can support this show at buymeacoffee.com/forthosewelost. The link is in the show notes below. And if you're still listening, and thank you so much if you are, if you like this episode, please share it with your friends, share it on your social media, and once you've done that, please rate and review this show on Apple Podcasts, because that's where most of our new listeners come from. Ratings and reviews are the main way this podcast finds new listeners. So please share the show. Until next time.